Hi guys, in this video we're going to look at writing explicit rules and look at input-output machines. Some of the definitions on this set of notes is similar to the ones from last night, so let's get going and take a look at definitions. So an explicit equation is an equation that tells you how to calculate an output value based on a given input. And we talked about input-output yesterday on notes number 2. So if you remember, our input, another name for that was our domain. In a sequence, it was our term number. In our table of values, it's the x values. But in terms of an input-output rule, it is just the value that is entered into whatever function machine or whatever rule that we are using. The output, if you remember, was our range. That was the value of each term. That was our y values. And in terms of explicit rules, it is the calculated value. This is after we apply the rule, whatever rule it is for the input-output. After we put the number in, our output is whatever that rule told us to do. So let's take a look at this function right here. Here's our little function machine. So the rule for this function machine is the input-output machine is the output equals 2 times the input minus 3. So whatever our input is, that's what we're going to plug into that rule. So our output equals 2 times our input. In this case, it is 3. So 2 times 3 minus 3, and following the order of operations, 2 times 3 minus 3 is just going to give us 3. So our input is 3, and our output is also 3. So in example number 2, we have an input of -5, so we're going to use the same rule. Our output equals 2 times the input, which is -5, minus 3. That gives us -10 minus 3, and -10 minus 3 is -13. So let's take a look at this little diagram over here. The input, which goes in the function, this is the rule that we had. Output equals input times 2 minus 3, and whatever came out after our function machine applied the rule was our output. Okay, so how to find the function when you know the input and output. So here we knew the rule and we had found the input and output. This time we're going to look at our input and output and then find out what the rule is. So I'm going to make a table with this just so it's easier to see. Using these 3 examples up here, this is our input, our term number, this is our output. So when we plug in -2, our output is 7. When we plug in +1, our output is -2. And when we plug in 3, our output is -8. So unlike a sequence, when we were trying to figure out how to get from 7 to -2 to -8, we're trying to figure out how do I go directly from -2 to 7. What rule can I apply to my input so that I end up getting out -7? So this sequence, the number that we have on the output side is bigger if we took the absolute value. So I know I'm probably going to have to do some multiplication. So I can't if I add, what number can I add to negative 2 to get 7? That would be 9, but 1 plus 9 is not negative 2, and 3 plus 9 is not negative 8. So I have to go back up here. Okay, what can I multiply times negative 2? If I multiply negative 2 times 2, I get 4. What can I add to negative 4 to get 7? That's 11, and we have to see if that works for every other rule. But this rule, let's take a look at how can I end up with a positive number over here. So negative 2 times negative 3 is 6. What can I add to 6 to get 7? 6 plus 1 is 7. Let's try it down here. If I multiply 1 times negative 2 1 times negative 3 is 3, plus negative 3 plus 1 is negative 2. So how do I get from 3 to 8? 3 times negative 3 is negative 9. Is negative 9 plus 1 negative 8? Yes, it is. So our rule is to multiply by negative 3 and then add 1. So our output equals our input times negative 3, and then we add 1. And this one was kind of a hard one. We'll take a look at the examples on the bottom. They're not nearly as hard to decipher. So we're going to do a recursive, which is a now next. This is our recursive that we did yesterday. We're going to write a recursive formula, and we are going to write an explicit formula, which is an input-output. So let's take a look at the recursive first. The recursive just looks at how do I get from one output or one y value to the next. And that's our now next. So we're starting Okay, so here are your video questions for writing explicit rules and input-output. For number 1, you need to write an input-output rule for the following function. So input-output, remember, is looking at the term number, the input, to the value, which is the output. How do we get from x, which is really what this is, to y? So we need to write a rule for that. For number 2, same thing, we're going to write an input-output rule. How do we get from 9 to 8, from 8 to 7, from 5 to 4, from 4 to 3? And in the Google form, you're just going to write in these missing 2 values here, those 2 right there. When the input is 7, what's the output? When the input is 6, what is the output? And again, don't forget to do your Google form.